as discussant with us on this panel, we have my colleague Mona Harib, who is Professor of Urban Studies and Politics at the American University of Beirut, where she is also co-founder and research lead at the Beirut Urban Lab. Her research investigates governance and territoriality in contexts of contested sovereignty, urban activism and oppositional politics, and how people make collective life in fragmented cities. She is the author of Le Hezbollah à Beyrouth, de la banlieue à la ville, co-author of Leisurely Islam, Negotiating Geography and Morality in Shia South Beirut, with Lara Deeb, co-editor of Local Governments and Public Goods, Assessing Decentralization in the Arab World, with Sami Atalla, and co-editor of Refugees as City Makers with Muna Fawaz, myself, and Dunya Salami. She serves on the editorial boards of MELG. I'm not really sure what these acronyms, what these initialisms stand for, Mona, so forgive me. So on a bunch of editorial boards. I'll leave it at that. Welcome, Mona. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ahmed, for the introductions, and welcome to this fifth panel of city debates on action in commons. So we're going to be pushing further, I would say, our collective explorations of how to amplify these entanglements we've been talking about a lot throughout, between multiple and diverse actions and experiments, I would dare to say, at commoning. The word has not been much shared, but I think in this panel we'll hear it more. So these are experiments and actions many of us here in the room and beyond have been seeking to advance, and I think we're doing that. It's important to recall, and we heard it a lot this morning, against an incessant violence, disruption, dispossession, hegemony, and the repression of I can't even pronounce neoliberalism anymore. It's in my body to that, it's like the disgust is to that extent. Interesting. So entanglements is a key term I think we heard, and that it began with Ahmed's very inspiring opening note, and it reminded us of the hopes embedded in that word and that concept in the experiments themselves, and I think more importantly in their connections, and the role of such spaces like city debates to create more of these connections and intersections and consolidate further existing ones. And I think we have a lot of critical scholarship. We're going to hear several of it in this panel on urban political ecology, on actor networks, on infrastructures, on commons itself as a concept that theorize why these entanglements matter, and that more importantly, I think, help us to investigate the tools and the modalities through which we can produce and further them. So I'm going to move to introduce the speakers and give them the floor so we can maximize the time they have and the time for discussion. So we're starting with Nityanand Jayaraman presentation. So Niti, as we call him, is an engineer turned journalist and a social activist that has until recently been based in Chennai, India. So over the last 3 decades, he has worked alongside coastal communities, fighting against destructive and land-degrading activities in the name of development and conservation. In 2002, he founded the Vetiver Collective that mobilizes science, law, arts, and media-based solidarity for social and environmental justice struggles of the marginalized. He's currently pursuing a PhD in political science at the University of Waikato in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and he will speak of how countermapping can operate as insurrection of subjugated knowledge through the case study of activists saving the Ennore Wetlands in Chennai, India. Online, we have Omar Khaled, who's a visual artist and a multidisciplinary architect based at Cluster, the Cairo Lab for Urban Studies, Training and Environmental Research. He obtained his bachelor degree in architectural engineering from AUC in 2023, the American University in Cairo. And he's someone who believes in the duty towards the city and its and its dwellers, and he recognizes the power of individual and collective creativity in spatial praxis. So he's making his inquiries grounded in sociopolitical and economic mechanisms along with environmental matters in the built environment. So at Cluster, he worked on a number of local and international projects, and he was included in many discussions, including on the design-build project of community care vehicle held recently in Cairo last year in 2024. He will speak of how mapping can instigate action and interactions, so very much aligned on the title of the panel, and he will show us one of my personal favorite projects of Cluster that I often feature in my classes. You'll discover it in his presentation. We conclude with Ana Méndez de Andés, an urban researcher and practitioner who has more than 2 decades of experience in the analysis of urban transformations, new institutions, and democratic governance. She is trained as an architect and urban planner, and she has a PhD on urban commons and municipalism from the University of Sheffield. She is a founding member of the Observatorio Metropolitano de Madrid and the Urban Commons Research Collective, and as part of the municipalist movement, she worked as a strategic planning consultant for the Madrid City Council and as a coordinator of the European Municipalist Network. She also founded the Cartag Collective in 2004 and recently analyzed the relational aspects of urban commoning processes in Barcelona, co-produced a mapping of the municipalist ecosystem, and participated in the critical mapping for the municipalist movement research project. She will be speaking to us about tactical cartographies and mapping as collective action, advancing commoning processes. So please join me in welcoming our 3 speakers. Hello, Omar, how are you?
Hello.
We wished you
Doing
were
well.
with
I
us.
hope I wish I was able to come, but yeah, apologies for not being able to be with you.
Yes, our
And
loss
thank you so
too.
much for the previous presentation.
Looking forward to hear you. I'm going to come back and give you a 5-minute sign, so so you know you need to wrap up in case.
Okay.
Okay, you
Perfect.
need it. Thank you.
I think I cannot hear you perfectly. I think either the mic is a bit far away or...
Recording in progress.
Okay, I don't know if I need another. I need the, but it's okay now. I'm going to give you the floor and you can start.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So hello everyone. I'm Omar Khaled. I'm an architect and part of the cluster team for the past almost 2 years. And today I will be mainly I'm sorry? Okay. And today I will be mainly reflecting on clusters mapping approach spanning over the past almost 12 years from my own reflection and from my own point of view, from my own interaction with the team and also with the works. And also having had the opportunity to work on some of the projects myself. And yeah, as I mentioned, as it was mentioned earlier, I'm mainly focusing on mapping as a tool to interact with the city and its stakeholders, and also a tool to instigate action, and how they both interact together. So a brief introduction on cluster and on Cairo as well. From any of you who do not know anything about Cairo, Cairo has been recently, over the past 2 decades, experiencing this expansion to the east and the west, outwards, out from the central city, out from the city center or the core, the administrative core. And some of you have heard of the new administrative capital to the east, New Cairo, and also Sheikh Zayed or 6th of October city to the west. And really this impetus to move beyond the city center and create new possibilities for investment, this new liberal approach, which is mainly led by formal institutions and also privatization and private institutions. But also it's important to recognize on the other end the local practices and the day-to-day lives. And also we like to recognize urban informality as a very important actor in city building. So with that said, cluster really is, it's positioned in this in-between, between the formal institutions and institutional regulations and the expansion of the city on one end, and local day-to-day practices and everyday, or as we call it, urban informality on the other end. And through our practice, we also try to define what is informality. Is it just about chaos, or just about underprivileged areas or marginalized areas? But we like to define it for the time being as informal or built beyond the formal radar. So the quick introduction on the spaces of action, as I like to call it, we have the main office and also a public library. And we have this project called Krill, where it's an open source and connect multiple libraries in Cairo and also in Beirut and also multiple cities around the MENA region. And in Aguza, it's in the center, it's in the city center, and also we have another creative lab, mainly for prototyping, etc., in Ardeloa, which is considered one of the largest informal areas in Giza. And in this space, we really try to interact first with the local residents and local communities, and bridge this gap between designers and formally trained designers, and the local residents and craftsmen and manufacturers. And this is basically the point to the right is where the main office in Muhandisin, and as you can see from the grid, this is the planned city, as we like to call it, or the mainly planned city in Giza. And on the left we have Al Fabrica in Ardeloa. It's in this dense urban fabric in Ardeloa. And I think it's important to recognize how cities like Cairo, which it's expanding first within the formal radar or formal state institutions, and also beyond it, as we can. It's still informally, it is still being built. So I think it's important to recognize how mapping in this very dynamic and contested urban landscape can work as both documentative, but also it is a mode of interaction and a mode of engagement with the city and its stakeholders. And first, I'd like to recognize how the first step, as I like to call it, is expanding the framework of action or the base of action to include multiple stakeholders. As I mentioned, it's between authorities and locals and creatives. It's how can we work in this in between? And in this, we mainly work on three facets. The first is creative design and tactical intervention, mainly pilot projects in public spaces that are supposed to be copied and adopted and appropriated by local communities. And the second is action research, where we try to build a momentum for action and researching and prototyping projects and testing them. And the third, which is the main focus of today, is the critical mapping. And there are multiple ways that clusters have been mapping, mainly cognitive mapping, tangible and intangible heritage, stakeholder relationships, institutional mapping, sound mapping, for example, and mapping urban informality in Cairo, but also in other cities in the MENA region, and also creative industries. How can we map relevant or sister organizations? And for the sake of today's presentation, I'm focusing on two main aspects. First is more about the spatial mapping, which is about mapping streets, sidewalks, buildings, etc. And the other is more social mapping. And the first is mapping to instigate action. It's mainly focusing on how we reflected on the cluster's work. How can we map to build a momentum to start either physically intervene through urban furniture, plantation, proposing urban design like bike lanes in downtown Cairo, or also intangible intervention, propelling discussion, programs and events, and also tours and alternative narratives to the city. And on the other end, which is also related, it's how can we map interactions with authorities, interactions with other organizations, with the locals, with manufacturers. And in this sense, we're trying to first make sense of this very tangled and very contested jurisdictions, whether between authorities, who has the say in this, how can give us this permit or this agreement, which is very, in Cairo and other cities in the Global South, it's not as clear. It's not one solution. So it's really about how can we make sense of this entanglement and try to untangle it and document it and propel it. So to begin with, the first one of my favorite projects as well of clusters is Cairo Downtown Passageways. And it was really about how can we propose a different or alternative way of to view downtown Cairo, one of the historic city centers, and also propose a framework for urban regeneration through its sidewalks and passageways between buildings. This in between spaces between buildings, between streets. And the second project, which was like it was building on this momentum that cluster started with the locals and with authorities. It's design and implementation of Kodak Passageway in downtown Cairo. So to begin with, as I mentioned, the mapping project for the downtown passageways was about creating an alternative narrative to downtown Cairo, understanding the in-between spaces. Also, first as a physical space in between buildings, but also as a state between private spaces like private residential houses and public space, or what is supposed to be public space. Streets, as I can see here, like a cafe, what is public and what is private? Is it some of the passageways are totally occupied by cafes or shop extensions, or others are extremely empty. So the first step was to categorize and start collecting all the data and all the different forms of formal categorization to understand the different forms of passageways, what is private, what's in between, what is public, what is occupied and what is not. And the second aspect was to categorize and start to collect it on an online directory. How can we make it an open source sort of to make it accessible for everyone? So we start to categorize and analyze and start to take pictures and have interviews with different stakeholders in downtown Cairo. And as you can see from the map, it's like a parallel to the main streets, the main grids of the city, which was planned. And the second step was also to start one step at a time, start creating these thematic tours to the general public, whether to researchers, to engaged citizens, to relevant authorities. We started creating these different tours, one of which were the cinematic tour in the city, where we had like some local organizations lead those tours. And then the building on this momentum, in 2014, Cluster designed and implemented Kodak Passageway, which I believe was really like a next step. We built this momentum, and how can we not just leave it at a publication or an online directory, but to actually instigate action and physical intervention. And this project started with reaching out to local residents and shop owners around the passageways. As I mentioned earlier, how can we expand this base of action to include them? And actually, they might be the ones managing this passageway, because we won't be managing it on the longer run. So this started with interviews and surveys with local shop owners and residents. It wasn't very smooth, and I would like to build upon a point that was mentioned in the previous presentation about fluidness and about in-betweenness and these states. And I know we were talking about water, and now we're talking about people and buildings, but for me, it's really how can also this is very fluid, and it's not easy, it's not clear. This relationship is also not smooth, and how can we work and oh yes, I want this shop owner has this requirements, but also the other one has other requirements and needs. And then we also have the authorities that we have to deal with. So the second step was to reach out and to inform authorities and start to gather all these permits and make sense of all these jurisdictions and all these agreements that we have to deal with for implementation. And then finally, it was about activating the space through events, through reaching out to other organizations. And we also worked on creating this board of membership between local residents and shop owners to first manage and also to maintain the space. So also, moving on, the second project, which is related to this idea of building upon a momentum of mapping and intervention and interaction with the city. Another project called Informality as Creativity, Mapping Creative Industries, which was in 2022 until 2023. And the other project is called Bridging Inequality Through Creative Economy in Informal Areas a year later. The first project was about how can we see it as a generative space. It has networks of businesses, manufacturers, etc. And it's not just marginalized and underprivileged. It has so much potential. And the other project, Bridging Inequality, was about how can we bridge the gap between formally trained designers and the formal economy, and artisans and craftspeople in the informal economy. On the left, we can see this map the difference between the percentage between formally planned areas and informally planned areas. And it's almost like it's almost 40 to 50% of the greater Cairo region. And the other is we started mapping the street hierarchy in Ardeloa. How can we understand, to further understand the supply chain later on, I will mention it, and the different streets and how to get inside and how to get outside, and the connectedness of Ardeloa to the rest of the city. And the other project, Bridging Inequality, it was based on 3 main modules. The first one is called Carpentry and Metal Workshops, and Metal Work Furniture and Design, which was based in Ardeloa. And there's another one called Palm Reeds Crafts, which was based in Fayoum, trying to work with craft people working with, it's like a heritage, it's a historical craft working with palm reeds. And the third one was Reviving Signage Techniques, just an introduction of the 3 modules that I will later on talk about. And the project first started in 2022 with mapping all the workshops and small manufacturers in Ardeloa, and also the supply chain, and try to categorize the different workshops between carpentry, upholstery, aluminum, glass, all these things that actually in fact work together. They do not work in separate, and I will mention this later on. But one point is that most of workshops are not registered in the system. So this was a point first of discussion and fear between cluster and the workshop. Why would they trust you? It raised questions like, are you part of a certain state organization? Are you a threat to us, etc.? But I believe later on, step by step, slowly, it started building a repertoire, a trust between cluster and the different workshops and manufacturers that were mapped and interacted with. So first, this project started with, as I mentioned, categorizing the different creative industries. First, for example, carpentry, and making sense of the supply chain, the different safety gears, transportation requirements, whether the workshop is, where it is located and how materials reach it. And second was to make sense of how these different industries work together to create one product or a few products. For example, the metal workshop can work with the carpentry or fabrics and textiles. It's like an interrelated network. And one of the outcomes was a published directory shared with designers, suppliers, or offices, and also online with all these different workshops that we dealt with and we interacted with. And this project led to the first module, which is furniture design. After building this repertoire, as I mentioned, with the different workshops, we started reaching to them again to start working on furniture design with designers, like high-end designers or just recently graduated designers, to create products. It was mainly to expand possibilities for revenue generation, and also to build on their capacities as artisans and designers. And to build on this repertoire that we had with the craft people is to make them feel that they are gaining something positive out of this interaction, whether it is something physical or revenue-based, or something intangible like capacity building, visiting different scales of workshops and manufacturers. And this project led to, we had an exhibition and also started marketing it online and started to sell these products that were that were collaborations between the local craftspeople and formally trained designers. And the second project, which is the third project, which is more related to mapping for interaction, which is called the community. It's a community care vehicle and a collaborative project between Cluster and 2 studios in the Netherlands, which is about how can we create a very compact vehicle that can reach into small alleyways and in different areas, but mainly focusing on Ardeloa for testing and for feedback and for management of the vehicle. And this started with understanding the different scales of mapping the different scales of streets and the different streets, and how emergency vehicles and other services reach these areas. And it's a very dense urban fabric. So we try to make sense of how the accessibility of services, and emergency vehicles, And in terms of manufacturing, we worked on two main sites, like a very large-scale manufacturer in the east called Abur City is the main manufacturer where we had the main skeleton designed or implemented. And then in Ardelewa, we also had multiple things being manufactured in the local community, whether it's small elements, accessories, or windows, etc. And we had the main meetings in Ardelewa itself. And the first interaction for us was how can we reach out to authorities and to reach out to organizations? How can we make any to look for specs and codes for ambulances and to bridge the gap between international standards and codes and local practices and what is available. And the second step was to reach to the community, whom are supposed to manage this vehicle and whom are supposed to use it, and it's designed for them. We held a couple of community outreach sessions and discussions, which really helped in the design and also in imagining how can this vehicle work. And in terms of the time mapping the overall interaction, it started with research and design, which was, we first started with interaction between us and the Netherlands, in Cairo and Netherlands, trying to understand how this project will be positioned, how will it work. And then also the preliminary design we held in Ardelewa. We held a couple of workshops and between students in the German university and professionals and also the local community. And then we started to implement the project, as I mentioned earlier, between Ardelewa and Al Abur and the big large-scale manufacturer. And we worked as the brokers between both to make this vehicle come to life. And then the other step was how to launch it. How can we get permits? How can we start managing and making it move and actually work? So we started mapping different scenarios and different authorities that are related to this, that are relevant to this vehicle. And sadly, it's not moving very well. As I mentioned earlier, it's not easy to understand the jurisdictions of multiple authorities because they overlap. And it's not very easy. So one of the opportunities we had was to showcase this vehicle in the World Urban Forum in last year, which really helped us reach to multiple relevant authorities and also interested parties and institutions locally and globally. So we started collecting all these contacts, all these possibilities, but still the local and the main authority, it's still not easy to deal with because it made sense because we were proposing something that is kind of new. The final project is called Prototype City along the line. It's in a public park in Aguza, right next to our office. This design is based on a series of modular elements placed in a certain composition for recreational, educational, and cultural elements. And it was really an attempt from Cluster to activate this park through events, through programs, through even the children playing, through cinema or screenplays. So the design was implemented in 2022, almost took 6 months. But ever since 2023 until now, we're still activating this space through programs, events, collaborations with different organizations locally and internationally to build upon this momentum that we have also with the authorities, because we were granted permits and agreements with the authority to actually manage the space. So we're trying to build upon this momentum that we already have. And as I mentioned, to activate the space, we started reaching out to multiple relevant creative and arts and culture organizations to help us activate the space. We have this online directory called QUIP, Creative Urban Initiatives Platform, which is one way of documenting all these creative arts and culture organizations. But also, we recognize social media as a method to reach out, engage, and archive events and activities. And the last step was to make sense of all these, map all these possibilities and all these aspects that are needed to activate this project. From funding, what funds are needed, who designs and implements the project, who owns the project and manages it, because Aguza municipality is the owner, but we manage the space along with other partners that we deal with. And finally, who is the project designed for? So it's really about mapping all these possible interactions and all the interactions that we already had to keep the project going and activating it. And yes, these are some pictures from the inauguration program in 2023 and still the children's workshop that we are our own the ongoing programs we have. And finally, I hope it was clear, but I'm trying to reflect upon the difference between spatial mapping and also social mapping and interaction, and how when we map physical aspects and tangible aspects like urban elements and stakeholders, it can lead to a design and action. And then it also can lead to other mapping of social and social aspects and interactions that can activate and keep this project going. So it's like a loop. It's not an either or question. And I hope I'm done with the, thank you so much. And I hope it was clear. And one last thing I would like to also mention is how can mapping become a framework for urban documentation, intervention, but also dialogue between residents and authorities, and we can work as the in-between kind of brokers, as I mentioned earlier. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Omar. It was very well received, and thanks for keeping time. Please stay with us for the discussion. We're going to move to Ana, please.
Thank you very much for the invitation to everybody that made it possible. Already mentioned several times, and thank you for everybody that is, survived this long, and for staying here strong. And the last presentation of the last panel, so more information for your tired brains. I want to start this presentation saying I am fully aware that I speak from a place of privilege. I'm not going to speak about subaltern subjects. I'm not going to almost speak, or I don't really work with migrants, not in a war situation, not in a flooding situation. Let's say I share the most privileged part probably of the capitalist exploitation of everything and everybody everywhere all the time. But I want to present these in also on a tradition of prefiguration. And I will present it to you as kind of things that might then happen in a certain point as a tools that you might be able to use in the future. And this is a tradition of the feminist, but also the municipalist thinking. One of the, So one of the things of this prefiguration, one of the narratives that actually has stuck with me for a couple of years now is this book. It's called Everything for Everyone. It's an speculative oral history of the New York Commune. So it commemorates the 50 years of the New York Commune that started in 2052. I have to say that the Palestine conflict and Gaza is mentioned repeatedly here. It features, it's very important because actually in this future past reflection of something that it doesn't happen, it doesn't exist yet. The first, the New York Commune was established in 2052, but the first commune actually was established in Palestine in 2048. So it is, looking towards this possible future that, maybe my talk will make sense among all the other things that have been discussed here. So tactical cartographies is a concept that we started to think in a meeting that happened in Tarifa. Tarifa is the closest point of Spain to Africa. And this meeting was triggered by people working on the 3 nodes of Indymedia Stretcho. I don't know if you knew Indymedia. Back in the time, they were working as nodes of information, but also like collectives. This is the only node that actually had 3 places, Granada, Malaga, and Tanger. So the Indymedia itself crossed the body of water that migrants crossed. So they choose this is an intervention by Strathern 3. They choose this as the site. And one of the participants in this workshop that we did about cartographies was Brian Holmes, who had been as an American thinker from Chicago, and he had been working with the Bureau d'études that did very famously, complex maps of power at the beginning of this century. And Brian brought this idea of what we are, that how cartography actually is trying to create a shared world, because you have, with the sensible word, and then the cartography makes a vision of this word, pass it to the viewer or the user of the cartography that generates a different vision of the same situation, and then you are hoping that what you are living and what you are interpreting and what the other person is interpreting somehow overlaps somewhere. So this is, like your best hope. So accepting that this is not the reality, but is something creating like a shared vision of what is going on. So 3 seminal maps, I'm going a little bit historically here. So 20 years ago, 3 seminal maps actually informed this idea of the tactical cartographies and the collective mapping, and why do we do maps, right? I would say we do maps to find the situations. One was, this map was collectively created for to challenge the Forum of the Cultures in Barcelona in 2004, which is a long story of urban expropriation through mega events that Barcelona has experienced. And the point is okay, social movements in Spain, they have a very strong anarchist background. So self-organization is like a core principle. Bunch of different, very, very different collectives, they couldn't really agree what to do together. So they say, okay, everybody does their thing. Doesn't matter, that's fine, super. But whatever you're doing, please just put it in the headquarters or around the headquarters of these companies that are actually financing the forum. And then you share this map so that we have this thing in common that we did in common, and then everybody can do their own thing. But this is how we actually make our presence in Barcelona. So this is mapping and explaining the headquarters of all these companies. I think it's Spanish and English, probably. But they also did, of course, what is this? What is the relation to the war industry and how all these industries were funding the forum? What is the relation with immigration, no? And how also is feeding this machine of the movement across the planet, and what also is the environmental impact of such events. So it's explaining a little bit why are we opposing this, and then we are doing this together, and these are the guys that are actually making it happen. This was one relevant mapping. The second mapping that was presented at Father Yad and was done by people from Arquitectura from Seville, that was part of the Indie Media Collective, this is a well-known map of the Strait of Gibraltar, and it's mapping again from this point of view the surveillance, the migrant movement, but also the different kind of production between Morocco and Spain. As you see, it's upside down, so maybe it takes a little bit to get around. And famously had this very pixelated, but that's very fine because it's very confusing, again, mapping of what are the relations between these nodes, between these people, between the collectives, working around migration in that area, which is densely populated by different kinds of also solidarity with the migrants, but also is Fortrex Europe, right? So it's where the one of the main, let's say, surveillance machines of the European Union is placed. The third mapping, also very relevant, was this map of the other Malaga, the alternative Malaga. That map, again, the industry, the exploitation, the problems with the water, the problems with the housing, the touristification, but also the migration aspect in the region of Malaga by our comrades in Malaga. And again, side B will try to then explain the relation between these elements, but also how actually by talking with different people and explaining that they were doing the map, then also people in the territory kind of join the dots and say, we're having the same problem that these guys are happening. And then what you are telling is the same thing that is happening. So it's not me, but there is something else. This led to the construction of the platform for the defense of the territory in these specific areas. So those maps for us, we call it tactical maps. And then we got this inspiration for the famous John Snow cholera map in London. And he's saying, well, we are doing mappings not for the sake of doing mappings. We are not doing archives. We are not trying to explain anything. We are trying to understand ourselves how we can actually intervene and operate in the territory. So this knowledge is for our actions, so it's generated by us and used by us, and this is why it's useful. So it's a tactical mapping. It's like Jon Snow said, like, I need to know where the color is coming. So because the kind of social movements were involved in these maps, this us is very wide. So of course it was not one collective, many collectives working on different problems that, as we heard, overlap one to the other. So when I went to Father Yad, I was part of the Observatorio Metropolitano. It's a militant research collective. And again, we did research not about the social movements, but we did research for the social movement. So the kind of knowledge that we were producing was not about ourselves, not for academia, not for anybody, not for communication, but it was more like, what do we need to know about the situation that is missing there and is not, like that will allow us to make a better intervention. So a part of this, of course, I went there and so like, okay, I'm going to do maps. So the maps of Madrid that we did, it was called Map Madrid, trying to analyze the processes that were described in the book, which was a very thick 600 pages book, and try to put them in a special situation. Like, okay, this, what we're talking is happening somewhere in the city and we can see it. So, of course, we made points in the map. So, we have the points. We also have the lines of the areas. This, for example, shows very basic, visualized a very basic division in the city of Madrid, with the north, west will be wealthy, natural areas, all the private universities, all the private hospitals, the gate communities, and all the financial sector. On the southeast, you have all the industrial areas, all the dumpsters, all the recycling things, and all the big logistic infrastructures. Also, as you see in the colors, the lower rents are here, the higher rents are there. I mean, very basic, but this really made like people think. What we did is like each of these nodes was very specifically described because we wanted to counterpose this idea of looking at the territory from the diedric, like projection, like you're in the infinite, you're looking like God over the territory and the map is flat. And then you have the dots, but the dots are from a specific point of view. So with this very lengthy legenda of 30 pages, we were saying, okay, this is why this kind of thing is important, and this is the information that we have taken into account, and this is where you can find it. So we try to somehow do a little bit of this connective perspective of, we stand here, we're looking in that direction, and that's why it looks the way it is. So fast forward almost 20 years later, what happened is like the Observatorio Metropolitano started writing about urban commons in the 2011, just actually before the squares occupation. After the squares occupation, we thought, what is this trigger? It's a long story, but we ended up proposing municipalism. We wrote this book, La Apuesta Municipalista, the Municipalist Wager, in 2014. And we were part of the municipalist platform that presented to the elections in 2015, won the government. So we were the government, but we were part of the government. Luckily enough, like this was happening in Barcelona famously, but also like in other cities in Spain, in Zaragoza, in La Coruña. They were part of the government in Oviedo or in Valencia. All the city councillors of the municipalist platforms together were the third political force in the country by 2015. This lasted only 4 years. Long story again, but then at the same time, Barcelona did an international meeting in 2017 in Barcelona, and there triggered this idea of doing an international network that we have framed it as European network because it's just the people that we know and that we have around. It's like there is not really very like geopolitical analysis, but just whoever we tend to meet when we meet. So let's call it European. So here, which are more dots, more points in a map, what is interesting about this map is that this map, when we were in Tarifa in 2005, we were discussing with the people from Mapomatics, an online tool to do collaborative mappings where people could put the dot, edit it, validate it, like change it and then create their own maps, and then the maps could get together. Okay, it has taken 20 years to find this tool, but this is a very cool tool. It's called Gogo Carto, Les Cartos à Gogo. And it's a tool, open source software to do community collective mappings. And we use that to do a self-mapping of the European municipalist movement that was useful because what we did, again, we map ourselves. So we asked these different collective platforms, governments, do you feel reflected? Do you think that this thing we call municipalism was something like maybe you are part of it? And then in that way, we were trying to reach out to places that not necessarily use the word municipalism to describe themselves, but that we thought were part of this ecosystem. And the other thing that I did is that I did a mapping of urban commons in Barcelona. So yeah, coming from that tradition, it won't be like a big surprise to see that I did, two sides, one that displays like a certain situation, puts dots, in this case actants, and the other one that tried to analyze the relations between them. Basically, what I did here is I tried to locate, using actually actor network theory and the idea of Isabel Stengers of an ecology of the practices, and to look what is this wide ecology of practices that go from social movements to, because this Barcelona was a municipalist government for 6 years by then. So these, what are the kind of actants? What are the kind of activities, actions, initiatives that were there present? How did they relate to each other? What kind of field of actions they were more or less defining in this kind of institutional habitat, from the very, very organic social to the high core institutional structure of the city council. And one thing, and this hasn't mentioned before me, and I think this is interesting, is that I realized that there is a reason why we do bottom up and top down, and you don't say bottom up and up bottom, or top down and down top. And it's because these two movements they have a décalage. They are not, in my experience, they don't touch. You cannot touch, like the most institutional layer, even when inhabited by municipalist activists. This language, this framework cannot reach the self-organized collectives. And those social collectives don't understand what the institution wants. And that is when this idea, not the broker, you need this intermediate position. I related to actor network, I call it mediators, but I call it transmediators. Are mediators that are actually translated between different layers. They translate between the social and the institutional, but also they translate between the civic society and the academia, or they translate between a certain kind of practice to another kind of practice. So it's this articulation not in one layer, but in different axes that made these things interesting. So actually what I was looking in this map is precisely this overlapping, these places that are in between, the actors that are in between and that are articulating. 5 minutes, that's a lot of time, actually. Okay. I will be fast. So, so what makes this experience, I think, so viable when looking at urban commoning is because urban commons was at the heart of the municipalist proposal in Spain. Municipalism said, we want to implement the commons in the government, what I would call the becoming common of the public, and to understand that also the layers that whatever defines the state and whatever defines the public is not exactly the same, and whatever defines the commons and whatever are the motivations also of the social movements are not the same. And this new articulation that municipalism was proposing, which is to take the state at the local level, you know, and the social movements that wanted to scale up and be more ambitious, these would need like a readjustment of a set of values, but also like the pure strategies that people are using. So as I said, one of these, the two characteristics of municipalism that also for me resonates with the capacity of enlarging, you know, and scaling up the commons are first this idea of the prefiguration, like to have the idea of what you're doing here and now is part of a more ambitious program, and how municipalism, what that's is a kind of vectorial politics. So not to define in a project, not to define in like a final vision, but this is an idea that we got from Raquel Gutierrez Aguilar, which is a Mexican sociologist working in Puebla with commons, the people also from Oaxaca and from the comunidades that are developed in Mexico. And then she was once talking, I mean, Raquel is like ex-wife of Garcia Linera, vice president of Bolivia, and she was actually in jail for being part of Tupac Katari, which is a revolutionary movement. But she said it's like there are people that are trying to define like the resultant vector, and they are the ones that are pushing to the vector. So like to understand that in order to move the given path, no, that we have in front of us, no, like this curve that goes towards +3 degrees already, I don't know, in 2030. We have to have a series of vectorial movements that retrace another possible future. So for us, the rule of tactical mappings would be, and then I go back to Father Jad and the talk of Brian Holmes, where he said, like, at the end of the day, every map is a map of the treasure. We all do treasure maps, but the treasure in this case is someone that you can work with, is the coalitions that you can do that will help you to get your struggle, you know, to move your vector in this other direction. And as it was also mentioned, mapping and maps are not the same. Mapping processes take all kind of shapes. And I think that the meetings like this, in my case, are a kind of mapping in itself with a certain kind of gathering of energies and, probably full of treasures. So thank you very much.